Shaurya, thank you so much for speaking to us here on the sidelines of the IDFC Institute conference and on BloombergQuint. There are three things I want to talk to you about, and essentially all three add up to your assessment of how far we've come in the 3 years of the Narendra Modi government, but also an outlook on what the economic environment in the country is right now. And those three things are the promise of less government and more governance, reforming the bureaucracy as maybe one element of that as well, and finally the issue of economic reform. Let me start first with the promise of less government and more governance. Now, do you really believe that that has been delivered in the 3 years so far at least?
It depends on how you look at it. Okay. The short answer to your question is yes. You will counter argue optically by telling me that, well, it's the same number of ministers that the Congress had, and therefore, therefore it is not really translated into reality. Am I right?
I have a few more counter arguments, but
why don't you give me your counter arguments?
No, you should proceed and then I'll give you my counter arguments.
So I think when you say less government and better governance and less government, it's got elements of both better governance,
yes,
as well as less government. Now, in terms of better governance, I don't think there is any dispute in the country today that this government is giving better governance than what we have historically seen in the past.
Okay.
So at least that part of the equation is settled. Now, in terms of coming to less government, well, you see, less government is not just about the number of ministers or the number of government, and that's an important part. And I'm hoping that at some point those reforms will also take place, and this government has talked about a lot of political reforms as well, of putting them out. But less government is also about the philosophical view as to whether the government should be in those areas where the government is not needed. And ideologically, if you look at the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is in terms of, is a party that has always believed in terms of less government, just because that's their ideological belief. And even in the last NDA regime, pretty much every substantial change that has been brought to the government or lesser government, whether it was the fiscal management bill or controlling the number of ministers that you could have in the government, was always been promulgated through NDA regimes.
And I'd agree, including
disinvestment. So I think that if so there is, I think philosophically or ideologically, this government comes from that view, and therefore in terms of trying to bring in lesser government, it has been trying to get out of many areas and take back many things that are back within the communities and to society across the board. Now, where it has or could have done more is in terms of the point that you would raise, in terms of administrative lookout of how the number of government employees are in there, or the number of political appointees. I think that's a more structural change that is going to take a bit of time. That is going to take a bit of it concerns livelihoods, and it concerns architectural changes in terms of how we go about doing it. It could be very disruptive, but I think that by and large, while keeping the view on better governance, which is even more important. As a matter of fact, I think when you look at better governance and less government, let's not be confused that it's better governance that we are. If better governance came at the cost of more government, that would have also been fine. Generally, historically, it's proven that it's lesser government is better. But even if you take that argument, I think keeping a view that governance doesn't suffer, I think this government is trying to do as much as it can within the architecture that we have in trying to lessen it. So I would tend to believe that it is by and large on right track.
Okay. The issue of reducing the number of ministries, which is also an issue of political accommodation, to be honest, or reforming the bureaucracy, I'll come to next, because those are really the toughest decisions to make, and like you said, they could be very, very disruptive. But before that, if you say that we have seen instances of lesser government, and I'm saying instances, maybe not the ideal size of government, but instances, what do you think how would you illustrate that answer?
Okay, I'll tell you an example of a classic case that I learnt with. We are implementing one of the biggest reforms in the government. The government is coming out with this GST reforms.
Yes, of course.
This GST reform is going to be it's going to completely revamp the Indian indirect tax structure. This GST system has virtually non-existent human interface. So you are redesigning the entire indirect tax structure. This entire GST will be monitored online. It will be filed online. It will be transacted with the government through a completely non-human intervention. Government will only audit some 4 or 5% of the cases. That in itself will be a risk-based approach, electronically picked up by computers, and only in that 5% will there be some human intervention in the form of an audit and the interface with the business as such. Now think about it. The rollout of the complete indirect tax system in India, at least we will all agree, for 95% has no human intervention and no government intervention.
But that's an opportunistic use of technology, which if the government had not done, would actually have been quite, how would I put it, regressive.
Exactly.
Right?
That's what I'm
it isn't about, it has very, yes, it may over time end up meaning that any additions to the tax force in this country comes to an end because technology is taking over, but that's happening everywhere. Yeah. What have they actively done to shrink the size?
That's my point. So yes, so the question was that did this government come in and retrench employees?
No, not retrench. I don't even mean, I'll tell you why. Okay, let me give you some of the counterpoints and you tell me how you assess them. For instance, the BJP would agree that there's no reason for the government to be in the business of many businesses, right? The previous NDA regime was marked by several big ticket and I would say brave disinvestments, right? We've seen very little of that, though this year there are, I think, slow moves towards, reducing equity in key companies from the railway sector, insurance, etc. But as yet, we haven't seen a big withdrawal of government in many of the business sectors that there is no business for the government to be in business, right? We haven't seen that. Not just that, let me pick up another counterpoint. In the last 2 years, we saw the government put a lot of focus on Startup India. It's one thing to build the infrastructure for it, the policy framework for it. Why is the government getting involved in funding startups? I mean, you create the ecosystem and then let private capital take that risk. So I'm just asking or querying whether any of these, whether the lack of disinvestment or the interest in startup funding actually meet the goal of smaller government at all.
I'll answer both your specific questions, and then if you want you can follow up. In your first question on disinvestment, yes, in the first India regime there were certain disinvestments that the government did. In terms of this government, the number of disinvestments have not happened as much as people had anticipated.
Right.
There are 2-3 fundamental reasons for it.
Okay.
One fundamental reason is that in the interim period of 10 years, because of the myriad number of legislative and complex procedures and litigation that started with the first regime of disinvestment, created an environment where disinvestment became fraught with much of legal and judicial process, including how do you fix valuations, how do you fix price, what is a national asset. Everybody thought every asset that you sell of the government of India is a platinum asset, and therefore any government that does is actually transacting with in terms of crony capitalism. So you must understand that in the last 10 years, this whole disinvestment got slotted in a box from where any tinkering would have unleashed a complete different box of worms, where would have nothing substantive would have been achieved, but you would have got caught in this whole battle between effectively siphoning off of national assets. Now, I think the government first has to create a very transparent framework whereby people who are engaged in that process are completely are insulated and being able to take very objective decisions, and there is no risk of being taking the disinvestment back into that area in terms of where it could be, you could say it's crony capitalism, it's giving away the national asset. So you got to keep the background. Unfortunately, the last 3 years it came with a baggage of 10 years. That's point number one.
Okay.
Point number two is that in terms of the assets that the government actually holds, in substantive terms, there is not much difference that is going to be made to the exchequer. Disinvestment looks as a great headline news, but really where we are today in the asset cycle across the world, nobody is going to pay huge premiums and huge prices. The market hasn't really changed for somebody to come and really give you top prices. So this is not really a great time to sell generally. No businesses across. So for India to go about tom-tomming its assets and telling that everybody is going to go sell them, you are going to sell these assets at rock bottom prices. So even in terms of the cyclical downturn that we are globally, we're not in the right time to sell. Thirdly, I think we should use this time, which I think the government is trying to do, and you're trying to see, is to really come to much more of a sort of philosophical and settled issue as to how and what we are going to keep assets in the public sector domain, which is important, and there are certain assets that cannot be privatized. We talked about this whole Jan Aadhaar, the opening of the bank accounts.
The jam trinity.
Much of this was done by the public sector banks. Private sector banks, proportion of this was very small. So the question is that in a poor country, would you want to keep the banking system completely in private hands, or would you want a public sector bank still have a role? Okay. In the issue of oil and in certain oil companies, would you want to keep them out completely or allow them to exist only for profit? For example, railways. Railways is a classic example. Railways is the asset of the people of India. The management of the railways is not necessarily linked to the ownership of the asset. We have to find mechanisms to de-link the two. Why would I want to sell away the assets of India to a Japanese investor or to an American investor? I'd like the value add that happens. After all, it's the world's biggest railway system. It has the potential to generate huge returns. What I am really saying in terms of disinvestment is that let us change the mechanism by which these organizations work so that they become more accountable, they are able to attract the best talent, they are run in the best corporate traditions, we are able to hire the best people. In the railways, despite the fact that railways employs 13 lakh central government employees and it's a politically very, very difficult place to actually start reforms, this government has actually started. The idea is that there is a slow architecture to say, well, why can't the railways really be the corporate owned by the government owned by the people of India, but run in the best corporate traditions? Now, it won't happen overnight.
Okay, fair enough. That was one point. Sorry, you
made a second point on
startup funding.
On startup funding.
Yeah.
The problem is, and I know this also as a practicing investor, there is little private sector appetite today to come and fund startups in India, and because the risk level of involved in investing in India and the risk involved was so high that generally there is no.
Why is government putting taxpayer money in such risky projects?
Exactly. Now see, this is how the argument cuts both ways, right? If the government puts the taxpayer, and that is exactly, you've just hit the nail on the head.
Exactly.
Let's talk about this.
To fund enterprise.
That's exactly the point. The question is that this is exactly the philosophical argument that has stopped India from being able to unleash any significant financial sector or infrastructure reforms. I'll argue, because every time you took risk, because startups or enterprise involves risk, that means you have to put risk capital. Every time the government wanted to put risk capital, people said, well, this is taxpayers' money. You can put debt, you can give loans, but you can't put equity. The problem with startups in India was that the time when this government came to power, it realized the importance of being able to use startups to be able to solve many of India's problems, both of scale, size, cost, that don't exist anywhere in the world. That means you've got to be able to bring talent not only to customized business models. I don't think this is really a startup. If you're taking, I'm sorry, I'm not going to take names, but if you just take one retail model that's already been done in some part of the world and try to bring it out a cost point here in India and try to sell it and say that, that's not startup. That's just commercially exploiting an opportunity. That's fine. India has a huge 1.3 billion population. India is a good market to everybody. It's not rocket science that every company will try to find a way to try and exploit that market. That's not going to solve India's problems. India's problems will get solved when people start trying to solve in the true sense, come up with innovation and ideas on trying to address that at India's price points, with India's problems. How do we come up with products, services, solutions that solve the problem of an average Indian?
And you agree that the government must
but I'm just saying, so to fund that, to create that environment, you've got to start at some point. Unfortunately, at India's per capita income, it may not be viable was not viable for startups. We didn't have any innovation centers in universities. We didn't have any fundamental research going on in universities. We weren't going to expect Apple to come and do that, right? It would be naive to think that some American company will come, or some venture capitalist will come to find out a good model to fund billions of dollars that can help exploit the market arbitrage, that because they are expecting a payback in 2 to 3 years or whatever time that they are investing in. But where does the real innovation come? So obviously the government is not the best place to term in terms of doing the startups or running startups, but government had to give some push. It would be great if the private sector in India stood up, if many industrialists who sit in India and who've got these multi-billion-dollar homes were to stand up, put up their hands. Nobody is stopping them and saying, we're going to start 10 labs across the country. That would have been a very welcome development. But because we are a country today where we can't do that to our businesses, where we can't ask anybody, so then the government also has to pitches in.
The second element of this I wanted to talk about was reforming the bureaucracy. This was a promise and an ambition of Prime Minister Modi even from before the time that he was appointed as Prime Minister. Do you believe the government has made any success or made any progress? Let me put it that way. There's no success to be had in this. It's a long drawn out process. Made any progress or any substantial progress in this?
The government has made progress.
Okay.
Has the government made enough progress? Difficult to judge, because you benchmark it against what?
Fair enough.
Right?
What would you count as the
I will
elements
count
of
many,
progress?
I'll count many factors as progress.
Again, I recognize this is a long drawn process.
It's a long drawn
I'm not
process.
expecting any overnight or in 3 years we will have changed everything.
I mean, I give this example to everybody, right? The government of India or government anywhere in the world is not a shop that you says, well, we are shutting for 6 months. Well, come, we are restructuring ourselves.
Yeah, no,
we'll come and open up after 6 months.
I understand the
so you got to do this
complexity
as work
of this.
in progress.
Yes, incredibly.
Now start looking at where are the fundamental changes that the government is starting to do in terms of reforming our, I would just call it the bureaucracy, but the general administrative system.
Okay, fair enough.
The first thing that the government did very early in its stage was that it devolved financial powers. You must understand, in government, much of the ability to govern, it relies on your ability to control the purse strings everywhere in the world in corporate. So the fact the government devolved 43% of the states was the first thing where it pushed away the governance or the control mechanism which is administered through the bureaucracy into the state. So that was the first level of evolution. The fact that the government pushed away some of these big changes like GST, etc., will further devolve the fiscal powers to states and give them greater leeway in being able to decide and determine the way they deliver through their administrative mechanisms the benefits and the last mile delivery to the people, because ultimately it's all about delivery to the people. Secondly, what the government has done, which is in terms of the ethos and working ethos, which is substantial change, which is that this government has tried, if you can see in 3 years, the narrative that corruption and subjectivity or in government decision making is not an acceptable norm. So at least in Delhi, we've had this situation now where either they believe that you can use graft to get your work done, or that you can use your access to sway the decision of the government in favor of a lobby is over. That the bureaucrats or the government works in the benefit of the people of India. It may still take wrong decisions, but its decisions cannot be swayed by considerations other than their view to try and deliver the best to the people of India. Now that is a big change, I think, in terms of reforming the bureaucracy, because most of the bureaucrats, most of career civil servants would want to work in an environment where they actually believe that they are delivering value to society, and the society is valuing their contribution in that, not thinking that, oh, at the end of the day there is really a way to earn extra money or have a secure job, or where we had converted a government job into really a way to bribe your lifestyle. So I think that's the second thing. Okay. Third thing, I think, where you in a small thing, but the very fact that the government is dismantling all those colonial elements of this belief that the VIP culture and the ability of the government to be somebody holier than thou than the people of India. The very fact that the Prime Minister from day one has started positioning himself as the principal servant to the people of India, as against the government that rules versus the government that delivers.
How is that reforming the bureaucracy?
No, because I'll tell you, because I was saying, you see what happens is, before you can bring about structural changes, before you can bring, you said, these are long term, before you can start bringing changes, you've got to create an environment, you've got to create the right narrative, you've got to create the right kind of consensus in a democracy and create a situation where these changes, incrementally as they may, can actually start happening and will find place. Ability to bring about talent. For the first time, I mean, pretty much if you talk to most bureaucrats in Delhi, they will tell you that selection of officers or people getting posted into Delhi is not being done by about who you know and which, but is actually being done by on the basis of objectivity. Officers are being bought from various states, being posted in various ministries, are being a certain amount of tenure in various positions based upon the fact that of their merit, of their caliber as against, or their honesty as against just being able to fix your appointments. Nobody can fix a job in Delhi today. Why don't you just go and do a dipstick survey? Just go around Delhi and ask people, right from a director level person all the way up, that can you actually get a job fixed? That is a huge change from the way Delhi used to work. Now, these soft changes are very, very important, I think, to be able to create an environment in which more structural changes can be brought about, where you can co-opt, because
what will those structural changes be? You have a year closer to the political ground than most of us. What are those structural changes going to be that hold out promise of actually achieving what Prime Minister Modi said?
I think, for example, as he says, rightly said, I mean, you can see that. I mean, you can see that in his own public statements of what he's saying, as against what he said yesterday in terms of the civil services day. I mean, his speech yesterday to the bureaucrats, right? I mean, the Prime Minister, what did he say? He says, we have to reform this the government from, think of yourself not as regulators but as facilitators.
Sorry to interrupt you, but let me put it this way. What would you like to see the government do in the next 2 years maybe to actually deliver even further on this promise of reforming the bureaucracy? What would you itemize as the most important things they should do to deliver on the promise of bureaucracy?
I personally don't think that on this situation there will be any overnight, or if people were
not
expecting
overnight, the next 2 years,
the next 2 years,
the government will have been in power
I think there will be a bunch of these steps that will continue to raise the efficiency of the government, that will continue to change some of the structures of the government. You're going to get a decentralization. What I think you are alluding to, which people would like, was that these headline news. If there was a way, but unfortunately I don't think there is even a way. Even if the Prime Minister wanted to do it, that if he had came in, he had chopped off the government and he had retrenched thousands of employees, and the government would have just. I mean, that cannot happen in the Indian structure.
There are economic repercussions of that as well.
Yeah, and also it's not possible within our administrative system. And
so it will never happen.
It will never happen that way. I do not think that.
You don't think a smaller bureaucracy might be?
No, I think a smaller bureaucracy is a very good thing. But I think
you're saying it may not happen.
No, it will not. I personally, I don't think that the government. No, I think it will happen. I think our government will, our bureaucracy will move towards a smaller, leaner, more technological savvy, less human intervention bureaucracy over time. If the political class and the bureaucratic class, I think, is also co-opted, it will not happen without their support, is consistently at it for a reasonable period of time. What it will not happen is this slicing and dicing and over big changes that will, because if you have to think about it, there are 13 lakh employees in the railways. If you had to really start doing the slicing and dicing, you should have started there. But can you imagine the kind of you could even try in the banking system? Leave aside thousands of people there. I mean, if you want, yes, but you may have to think about creating various exit schemes, thinking that how does the government.
Are those things elements that are part of the strategy over the next 2 to 4 years?
Yes, absolutely.
Let's concentrate on what you would assess as the misses or the things that you hope to see get done over the next 2 years.
I think one thing we could have done better is that we could have moved faster on this whole NPA issue. On our non-performing assets. I think we did the bankruptcy code, we put a lot of architecture in place that will allow this to be a much more softer landing. But our ability to not address this issue has had some impact on our economic growth, particularly on investment in the private sector. Now we did suffer because of that. So I think that was one area I think that the government maybe focused more on it and acted more swiftly on it. Then maybe we could have, I don't know if we could have completely eliminated the inter time, but maybe at least we could have truncated the 3 years. And by that time, hopefully, but I'm hoping that this is something that they will continue to work on very quickly, and because this should actually have been done as of yesterday.
What kind of solution are you looking for? Because some have been bandied right around. For instance, the bad bank solution has been a topic of conversation for a long time. Finance Minister Arun Jaitley has been promising for the last few weeks that there might be some new thinking on how to resolve this problem. What is it that you're looking for? What do you think are amongst the ideal solutions box?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert. I haven't studied this matter to a great extent, but I will tell you because I've been an investor in the infrastructure sector. See, India's good news is that India's NPA problem is not an endemic problem. About 9 lakh crores, which is about 9 to 10% of our total lending book, is our NPA problem. But it's a very concentrated problem. It's a problem that is in 5 sectors, in 100 accounts, or maybe 70 accounts, which constitute 90% of the problem. So it's a problem that is skilled. So we have to solve 90 problems. And literally all it needs, I guess, in some sense, is to sit account by account and solve it account by account. Because, and maybe that is why it's also. I mean, I'm hazarding a guess that somebody is not acted on it so fast, because it's not such an endemic problem. It's not as if all our industry is sick, we have got a very concentrated problem. Maybe to ensure that it is objective, it cannot be open to legal scrutiny. It is not, the government is formulating policy that is consistent and is not case by case.
And it also does not become finger pointing.
But not finger pointing.
Somebody will turn around and say this is political favoritism.
Exactly. But if we did not have such a hostile political environment, and we didn't have an environment where historically we had been straddled with such legacy, in many other jurisdictions of the world, you could literally take this problem and actually solve it on a case by case basis, either settling with people, enforcing contract, transferring assets, whatever it may have taken. But the constitutional and the legal and the legacy framework of India and the politics of India were, I don't think, allowed that. So that's one area, but those are the reasons. Okay, but I think, having said that, whatever be the reasons, I think there we have suffered because unless we declog the banking system, we will not be able to recycle on that. So yes, so that's one area where I think the government could have done better. I think the other area is that, we're and I know this is a monumental task. So saying that enough is whatever you do will not be enough. We've got 10 million people joining the workforce every month. Jobs, right? So
where are the jobs?
We've got to figure out sooner or later a formula that generates jobs. Now, I don't think that necessarily means that we're going to have to do it all in the organized sector, but we've got to be able to create an economic model where people are employed, people are gainfully employed, people are adding to the productive employment in the country, and whether they are entrepreneurs or they're employed or they're doing their self business, the fact is that they are adding to the per capita GDP growth of the country. That's one area.
And you think that maybe the government could have moved faster or more purposefully on some of these fronts?
I mean, in the sense that I think it's not just the government. I think the government should try and work to create a greater sense of urgency across the country. And this should be more of a national mission.